Tuesday meeting, and we do not have, well, let me just say this. I think we have entered Guinness Book of World Record status on the number of convention center meetings that have been had here in the state of Indiana. So this is this is exciting. This is another one. I've enjoyed spending all of this time with you all, but I am really ready to get this wrapped up. Yes.
Is there a different way to do that, though, maybe?
So we do not have an agenda for today, but I wanted to ask council if there are any motions to add agenda items for us.
Yes, we have a bit of work to do, and I move that we add to the agenda withdrawal of the two ordinances that were introduced Tuesday night.
Second.
Excuse me, was that a withdrawal or a table? I thought the
Oh.
motion was a table.
I haven't made the motion yet, so I will. That's this. I'm just amending the non-agenda.
Sure, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Over here. Is your
The
mic?
green light is on.
There you go. We can hear it there.
Swallow this. My motion is to add to our agenda, tabling the two ordinances we discussed Tuesday night.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Any questions on this motion? We'll do a voice. Yes.
Yes. Could we consider that we've had the first reading as yet? So we did, that counted the other one. So this was just tabling the second reading. Thank you.
So for point of order, this is still the agenda.
This is the agenda.
Right, but you have to know what it is you're voting on before you vote, hopefully. That was my question. Yeah.
Okay. We can do a voice vote on this. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
So council, I move to withdraw, to table the two ordinances that were introduced, and this tables them indefinitely.
Second.
Any questions? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
I
Yes.
have a motion. Mr. President, I'd like to add to our agenda, I'd like to make a motion that we add a discussion on the communication we received from the city of Bloomington dated December 11, 2019, discussing the representation on the CIB and the CVC to our agenda.
Second.
Any questions?
I would like to open it up for discussion of everything that's on that list. You can start with that, but there are other things on the list that I think we need to discuss as well.
I would amend my motion just to a discussion of the December 11, 2019 communication from the city of Bloomington.
Okay, any other questions on the motion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. So we will now enter into that discussion. It might be helpful for, is Ms. Rice in the room?
She's walked out.
Just stepped up for a moment.
Okay. Just to kind of have an overview of the different points here that were provided to us. But maybe I guess we can get into questions from council members, just start that discussion. Is there any discussion around the table? Who would like to kick this off?
Well, I mean, I think the bullet on here that affects the council the most directly is number 1, bullet 2, CVC. And so I think we want to discuss that one. It's read, each CVC each appoints 2 members subject to legislative restrictions. 5th member is a Memorial Union representative. As with CIB, appointees may not be elected officials. And so maybe Ms. Rice came at the right time and can join us at the table.
You're taking it all the way down to item 4.
Well, that's fine. I was just still on item number 1, bullet 2, CVC. And I guess I would like to hear from Ms. Rice what she thinks the options for working with that bullet would be.
And this is about the CVC appointments, is that correct? I suggested that it might be possible, and you might want to discuss the idea of the city proposing a panel of people who could be appointed, and then the statutory body that makes the appointments could then choose from that panel. What I'd like to do is try to keep intact the statutory authority for appointments as much as possible, to follow the statutory requirements about who makes the appointments. But if you want input from the city, I would suggest that they perhaps give recommendations and give a panel, and then from there, you guys can make decisions. That's one idea for consideration, and I did run that by Dave Schilling yesterday, and he agreed that it would be important to keep intact the language of state law that says who makes the appointments.
Can you say what a CVC is? I haven't said it.
Yeah, and Kathy Smith the auditor wanted me to point out, CVC is Convention and Visitors Commission.
And so are there other models where that kind of panel recommendation is used?
We use that. We lawyers use that when we're looking to get a new judge or a special prosecutor. Then the groups there will be a panel, and we choose from the panel. So that's where I came up with that idea.
Yes.
Question, are you saying the panel then would make a recommendation to?
No, I was saying that the city could produce a panel of people that could sit on the CVC, and from that panel, the appointing authority could pick and make a choice from somebody on the panel. It's like a slate of candidates, if you will.
So somebody else is handing us what we, the county council by state authority have to vote on.
They would give you choices, and then you would pick from those choices. That's an idea. I'm not saying you have to do it, but it's certainly an idea that they could make recommendations, and then you could choose from those recommendations. And you could make that list as small or as large as you'd like.
Right. So my question is, do we have the authority to sign something that locks in future county councils? Because the county council has the authority for appointment by state legislation. So whatever we do now, we were told for years, you can't rule from the grave, even if we try. So other than that, we're not allowed to change what the state tells us.
You're correct. What you're talking about is the fact that one discretionary body in 2019 can't bind the hands of, the discretionary functions in the future. There is case law on that, clearly. So you could write an interlocal, and if all of your successors in the future want to, amend the interlocal, and the city who's part of that interlocal wants to amend it, they certainly can. And what you're saying as well is, and why we want to be sensitive to this when we write the interlocal, is that we want to follow state law.
Mr. Thomas, did you have a?
Just a couple points. So one of the things I raised yesterday is, and it was not necessarily about the CVC, but it would impact that because it's with point one, is also no staff from city or county. The other question I would raise for this council is that you would be losing your county council direct representative. So I just want to point that out. Thank you. I don't know if that was obvious to everybody or not. Thank you.
Yes.
So I'd like to comment on that exact point, and that is the county council has a system of working with various departments, and we have a council member who's an appointment as liaison to a department. And we also could do this for a commission. So there could be a council member that liaises to the commission.
And I totally support that model. I mean, I was one of the CVC appointees from the council, and at one point, and I would be glad to gladly give that up as a council member, council appointment to the CVC, and instead we would just make that as a citizen appointee who's neither elected official nor staff.
So another important point on this is, are the terms of appointment indefinite? Once appointed, are they, I was also a council representative, but that's council business. I don't know about the terms of appointment for other members of the CBC.
I think you can amend some of that so that it's not an elected official or staff, except where it's called for by statute. And so you could maintain a council representation on that if you want. And you could also specify that only 2 of the positions would be filled using a panel recommended by the city.
Well, actually, the statute doesn't require that it be an elected official. We've just done that kind of by custom ever since I've been on the council.
To have it,
Just by,
the elected,
Yeah.
the third be an elected
official.
But the third could be another hotelier or whatever, that might,
Or somebody else who's knowledgeable and
or just somebody's friend, who knows?
And maybe that's better.
that part wouldn't be.
I'm saying.
The statute does say hotelier,
Do you want me to tell you?
The third one
the third.
doesn't.
That would be nice,
The third
yeah.
one does not.
I can tell you what it says. There is a 5-member Convention and Visitor Commission. The county council, by majority vote, shall appoint 3 members of the commission. 2 members must be owners or general managers of a hotel or motel having at least 40 beds located in the county. The commissioners, by majority vote, appoint 2 members of the commission. 1 must be an owner or general manager of a hotel with at least 40 beds. 1 member must be the director or associate director of the IMU. All terms of office begin on January 1 and end on December 31st. Members appointed by the county council serve 2-year terms. Members appointed by the county commissioners serve 1-year terms. A member whose term expires may be reappointed to serve another term. And a member of a commission may be removed for cause by his appointing authority. And for cause is defined by case law, not showing up, that sort of thing.
So then I guess the question would be, if we were to go along with the request of the city here for this equal representation, using the panel method, would the commissioners accept the panel recommendation for their hotelier appointment and the council accept the panel recommendation for one of their hotelier appointments? Would that be the most even way to kind of distribute the recommendations? Plus, we give up the elected official on the.
It's more or less even, but because one of our appointees is prescribed, if we give up one, then
You really only have.
We have none.
I know that
Yeah.
you guys are much more constrained on your appointees.
I would like to throw a spanner in the works because something just occurred to me, and I think this is something that might need some research. What would happen if the CBC appointments were all from, besides the AMU, were from hotels that were connected directly with the convention center? Is there a, well, because there's at least 1, maybe 2. So my question is there a conflict of interest possibility, and do we need to? Oh, okay, thank you.
When you said that, I mean, they have a vested interest. If their hotel is connected to the convention center, they're going to have a vested interest in and may not consider the interests of other hotels in the county. So there is something to think about there. And that's part of the consideration, I think, when making the appointments.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I just thought about that. Thank you.
I guess so. I mean, is everybody at least comfortable with the idea of, in principle, designating 2 of those hotelier appointments as being filled through a panel of recommendations from the city, and plus the county council agreeing to make our free appointment not be elected official or staff?
I'm comfortable with both of those ideas. I think it's, just to be consistent with our desire to keep elected officials off the Capital Improvement Board, we should do the same with the CBC. And the panel is totally fine with me. I think that is appropriate.
And Cheryl had a good comment about the liaison system. We do that with every other department. We just have a liaison for the CVC. You don't have to be on it.
So with that, I'm sorry. So with that, would there be then the one IMU appointment that's mandated, one that the county council appoints, one that the county commissioners appoint, and then the others, we'd have to figure out how we make the decision about the panel that is recommended by the city, whether the commissioners review and appoint one of those and the council reviews one, or how it would be split then for that review of the panel. Sorry, Marty.
Go ahead, Mark.
I'm perfectly fine with not having an elected person on there because we're the final arbiter of the budget anyway, which we need to make sure that we understand that and maybe work more actively and meet with them and maybe go to some of their meetings and so forth, because this is going to be a huge portion of it. And so it would be my hope that whoever we choose from, that we recognize that we have hotels, innkeepers throughout the county, not just in the city. And so the CVC is supposed to be representing tourism throughout the entire county. And it is not just for the innkeeper's tax. Is also supposed to be used for trade shows and other activities, not just for overnight stays, though of course the innkeepers likes for it to be for overnight stays. So whoever sits on that board has to recognize and look at that legislation and see how the dollars are allowed to be spent and continue to support that.
I totally agree, and that's one reason why it is important to have at least one appointee that doesn't come from the city, so we can make sure that it's somebody who represents the interests in the.
I keep looking over there to say, what does anybody want? This is, for us to make this decision without being able to talk with people that it actually affects is difficult. So
You can certainly take public input if you want public.
I cannot hear you,
If
please.
you want public comment or
Public input, that's certainly
Yeah, right,
something you
that'd
could
be
do.
good.
Would you come sit up? You'll have to put me on the places. Please state your name.
Hi, I'm Mike Campbell. I'm the president of the Convention and Visitors Commission. And I will say that everything you've talked about, I think, seems reasonable. I will say that both the county council and the county commissioners in the past have done a great job of taking recommendations from, lack of a better term, experts in the field who are invested in tourism in Monroe County directly as part of their roles. And we've always been able to say we think this person would be a great candidate and a great representative of Monroe County and Bloomington to further tourism. So I think as long as we're able to continue to do that and to give input as to we think these people, and the same thing with Visit Bloomington and the Convention Center, have always been able to approach our elected officials and say, these we think would be great candidates to help with the development of the area. I think as long as we can continue to do that, either statutory or not, I think it will be fine.
Still in public comment? Yeah, come on up, Vic.
There's a spot here. Thank you.
Mick Van Eisen, Deputy Mayor. I got the short seat today.
Is his mic on?
It will be when I get closer to it. Yes, it's on. Is that better? Okay, great. I just want to echo what Mike just said. I'm confident on the city side, we would do the same thing. We're going to consult the subject matter experts and say, who do you think should be and would best represent? So I don't really see this being anything that would change much from the way it has been, other than the city gets some say in the panel if that's what you all decide is the way to go about it.
So will this be, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Because I wasn't sure when Margie was speaking of a panel, would the people that the panel will be reviewing, will they be strictly city hoteliers, or will there be
It's actually your idea, so I don't,
And I'm not, go ahead and ask your question.
Well, I'm trying to figure out if the panel's only going to be looking at the hoteliers in the city.
My suggestion is that the city recommend a panel or a slate of people that would qualify, that would be the hoteliers or other people who, and so the city would propose a panel, you could pick the size of the panel, and then then they would give you the panel of people that list,
You
and then
are talking about panel and two different.
Yes.
I'm hearing a panel thinking it's going to be a group of people making a decision.
Yeah, a slate
Slate,
of potential
okay.
candidates. And then from that slate, you make your statutory appointments, the county commissioners and the county
A lot
council.
more sense, thank you.
Yes.
We're only talking about, what, 19 possible people, as Cheryl pointed out.
Well, and keep in mind, too, that not all of those 19 people may be interested in serving, too. So this is, it's important to keep that in mind. That's going to narrow down the field even more.
Panels, what have
Yes, Ms. Munson?
confused.
And I learned this morning from Mike Campbell that a number of the hoteliers don't even live in Monroe County or Bloomington. So, I mean, their business is here. Yeah, but their business is here, and so they may be willing to come for meetings. But we really do have a very small number for a panel to, a slate to be developed from.
Mr. Deckard?
When I heard about this yesterday, it occurred to me that I heard something similar before, and so I went back to my previous experience with the General Assembly and how we get our laws. And you'll rarely hear me hold either the Congress or the General Assembly up as the model, but for standing committees of the Indiana House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House is not bound to appoint specific members of the minority party to any standing committee by which bills are heard, laws become laws, but they have a practice by which the Speaker receives recommendations informally from the minority and makes those appointments to get common business done. And it occurs to me that in that nature, if that place, which is a little bit more toward here than local government, then we could probably do that. I mean, they literally operate on a standing rule in the House, not a law, that says insofar as feasible and practicable, the membership of the standing committees shall be made proportionate to representation of parties in the House. And from that, they have literally relied on each other to make appointments, nothing bound. And I think that kind of reflects a little bit of trust here that we can do locally on this, get this done, and keep moving forward.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for the Deputy Mayor or Mr. Campbell?
Now we're only speaking of just the appointments, not the budget.
Correct. Right. Yes.
Just the slate.
So it sounds to me like we're all okay with this. I don't think there's any real objections that I'm hearing of, so commissioners can take that into consideration.
Right. Because at this point, what we're doing is just gathering as much information as we can to bring this back to the city. So we're compiling the response. So that's why I'm glad we're all here, by the way. Thank you.
Well, and we publicly said yesterday, we were not committing things for the county council.
Sure. And the motion is a discussion.
Yeah. We're not.
Yeah, I think we're just getting into the future interlocal agreement here.
I think this, we can just go through each one of these individual numbers here and discuss these and provide feedback for the commissioners on this. So we'll move on to item number 2 here, the annual CIB budget. The city's requested that both county and city fiscal bodies approve. Ms. Rice, did you want to provide any additional context?
No, I'm interested in hearing what you guys think about it. We have been thinking about, I think we collectively, construction is a thing, operation is a thing. And I think the idea is to try to make the city and the county equal partners in the construction, in the operations. That's the big picture thinking. So do think about how you mirror those, the equality in both construction and in operation.
Okay.
I don't think it's terribly important, but in the discussion, it was mentioned that the budget would first go to the city council for approval and then come to the county council for approval.
And one other thing to think about is review and is different than approval. So let's think about that in terms of the language.
A binding review versus a review.
Yeah, so you could say, you could write it that there is a review option, and then it comes to the statutory authority for approval. If you said that they approve and you approve, that may be slightly different. It would be. Go ahead.
Well, I guess, yeah, I mean, I have no problem allowing the city council to also approve. This is sort of the way it works with the 911 dispatch center. And it's, it's both parties then have to agree for any money to be spent. But yeah, statutorily, the county council gets the final approval on the CIB, just by statute. But I have no problem also having the city council do an approval first.
Just a suggestion that it could go in two different directions, that one body has a review and then the other one has the approval. And we know that this body, the county council, has the CVC approval, so it could be heard by the city council first and then come to the county council, and then vice versa for the CIB. It could come here first and then go to the city, for example. So just a thought.
So in developing a budget, we all know we estimate our expenses and we estimate our revenue. And the revenue for the CIB would be the revenue produced by the center from its events. It would be food and beverage funds that would be appropriated by the city council, and it would be the innkeeper's tax approved by the county council. And so all those elements would be part of their budget as they're presented. Yes?
Okay. I'm trying to figure out why we aren't following legislation. First of all, we know that any revenue that they produce, their net revenue from operations, no one votes on. They vote on it. The CIB, it sits in a separate fund. The debt comes off of the top, however we plan to do that, and that has to sit in the debt fund. Their annual budget, according to the food and beverage tax legislation, it appears to me it would have to come to the legislative body, and we could say the city-county legislative body, but this comes the legislative body to go to that food and beverage tax advisory commission for their recommendations. So the city already gets first crack at that budget. We cannot approve. The county council is required by statute to approve the budget, to review and review the budget. But the money won't be there unless the food and beverage says it can be there. So it would come in first. The CIB would put together their budget. That budget could then be presented to the city council, who is the legislative body. That legislative body would take it to the Food and Beverage Tax Advisory Commission for their recommendation. This is the annual budget I'm speaking of, or any additional appropriation. And then we would be following the statute to then bring it to the county council for final approval. Now, these folks that worked in tourism understand how they have to go from one board to the other. They've done it before. They're used to doing it. It may sound cumbersome, but it works and it follows legislation. So I don't know why we would be thinking that city wouldn't have first crack at it anyway, which is appropriate.
Maybe Mr. Renisen could come speak again and just kind of discuss the reasons. What would be prevented from happening? What is this safeguarding from?
Well, I think it's a little bit of just the true and equal partnership and trying to put in concept the phraseology, and then the details are always the harder part. So starting with that was the general sense. Now, in this particular case, the Food and Beverage Commission and the funds that come through the city through that the city council has to appropriate, those are undoubtedly all going to be pledged only for construction. So that's a piece of the overall operation of our new collective center. But it's not everything. And I guess it's part of the unknown. We don't know what the CIB will actually need to do with budgets past the debt service that we know has to happen to begin with. And of course, Councilmember Hawk is correct. Once that decision is made, then the city's role is largely done, unless you all consider some of these other requests for budget approvals, unknown ones at this time, because we don't have a CIB that's operated yet, so we're all working in foreign territory. So I think it's a little bit of making sure that as those budgets are developed, of course working with the same system that has worked successfully for 30 years, that the city gets to have the city's fiscal body gets to have some oversight, at least of looking into how those funds will be spent. I think we've articulated building this with the funds that have been approved by you all to even allow this to happen is only part of it. Operating it is probably way more important than what we build, and there's been no problem with how it's been operated. But we have a new CIB, and eventually Talisha's going to retire, and so there will be new people that have to be determined in the future. And I think we just want to make sure that this 30-year agreement or more we're about to enter into doesn't prohibit some of the things we can't foresee at the moment.
Yes.
All right. I think what we just want to know, rather than getting into the details about the legal issues and the steps in terms of what has to happen first, second, third, we just want to know how the council feels about that process in general. I think it's for our attorneys to develop the language about the order of the process, but we just want to know how you feel about the process. That's really the only thing we need to talk about today.
Final vote still have to be any of the food and beverage money, or any of the CIB money would have to be approved. Final vote by the county council, because that's what the legislation says.
Yeah, I think we can all stipulate that we're going to follow the legislation. Let's just agree to that. No, I totally agree with you. I mean, I certainly support giving the city council the review role for all the appropriations within the framework of the statute.
Can I ask a question while they're at the table? And this goes to Julie's point, sort of high-level thinking, not getting stuck in the details. But is it the city's intent, with the document that you submitted yesterday, that the innkeeper's tax as well as the food and beverage dollars would both be reviewed and approved by the city and county?
I think that is our intent,
Okay.
knowing there are some nuance to what that actually means, but largely, I think, following your lead, Margie, we have an interlocal that works with dispatch. Maybe we can mirror some of the language there that works for everybody. It works there. Let's see if it doesn't work in these instances as well.
I'm hearing the word review, which is not the same thing as...
I said review and or approve.
We use at the moment, but we're certainly receptive to that. I think we're looking for joint and equal means joint and equal approval, and understanding that state legislature impose things we have to all follow. We're not suggesting that.
I think when talking about the city council going to the Food and Beverage Commission, Tax Advisory Commission, it's necessary to keep in mind that they themselves seem to have decided that all that they rule on is whether or not that money is being used for the purposes that the statute says. And they...
I don't think that's a good ruling.
That's what they've decided.
That is right.
But don't we have to find out what the legal ruling is? Oh, whatever. Anyway. Whatever. I came in here saying Merry Christmas, so.
Don't lose the spirit.
I have a question for everybody to consider. What is the relationship between the CIB and the present building corporation that handles the convention center and other properties? And I think that's something to be worked out. Once the project is constructed and operational, and the debt for the convention center is paid off, that makes for a very seamless transition to operate the new expanded convention center with funds that would come, be available from the CVC. But until we get to the point of completing the debt payments, I don't see that as being clear, and I just want the people who know more about how the finances are handled and how the agreements for fair and equal are worked out to consider this. And I don't know exactly what the actual responsibilities of the building corporation for all properties. I just know for some. Mr. Buckler.
I just kind of briefly, that is clearly, the debt issue that we currently have on the property is going to have to be resolved, and we're going to have to discuss that and figure that out. By the debt documents, the building corporation holds title to the property, and then as it currently sits in the county, has a lease that essentially says we do what we want within certain parameters because of the innkeeper's tax use and things like that. And then once the debt is resolved and paid off, then the title would transfer to the county. I think it's just the county, Monroe County right now. It's been a while since I've looked at those documents. And then essentially the building corporation doesn't really have a role through that process. I mean, we were dealing with our jail building corporation, which right now does not have any property, but we're keeping it open in case in the future we think we might need it. So from a legal perspective, the role of the building corporation is just that is kind of the mechanism that we use to finance that debt to get out of the 2% constitutional debt limit. Now, historically, that group of individuals has always taken on kind of what I would see as kind of a CIB role with that. They're ones who work with our CVC to bring recommendations to us to kind of let us know what's going on and to give some guidance. And so I see those responsibilities will be taken over a lot, and they should be by the CIB, because that's kind of what their role and responsibility will be. Does that answer your question?
I think there are probably some very important details to work out as to how to mesh the responsibilities and the decisions.
There are a lot. I mean, that is just another part of the puzzle that we're going to have to put that together.
But if we're talking, have we switched now to be talking about debt and properties and so forth? I mean, because that's down a little further in these bullet points, because I wanted to mention some of the property transaction.
Well, I would say that when the topic of the building corporation came up, it almost obligates me to come up and say that deals with the property, and I'm not trying to mess your order up in any way whatsoever, but I thought that
I'm not saying that. I just want to make sure we discuss, if we're discussing the buildings, I have some concerns.
I wasn't messing with the order either. It's just that this was pertinent to budgets.
We're still on item 2, although sounds like we're all favorable to this idea. Are we also, does that also extend to the bonds and the CVC budget?
I mean, that's what I intended to support, extending 2, 3, and 4 within the statutory requirements.
Yeah. It seems like we're doing this in the spirit of true and equal partnerships. Details are going to be worked out later. This seems appropriate.
Okay, so I think we're all in consensus there on 2, 3, and 4. So moving on to the garage. Finance, built, and controlled by a city with non-food and beverage or innkeepers resources. I don't think that sounds too controversial. To this group, at least.
It was last night, but not today.
Why did we argue?
Remember, you have to name it after Steve Bullen. I thought it
Can I ask a question about the garage?
Yes.
I was thinking language might be helpful in an interlocal that
that said the city would commit to ensuring that the convention center has adequate parking at all times?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I think from your previous experience, you know our contractual arrangements with the Hilton Garden Inn, for example, at the parking garage next to it. And of course, the whole reason for building it is to accommodate the traffic for the convention center. So first and foremost, we would start there, and then any transient parking that would be available after that agreement was met would be used for those other purposes.
So the priority is given to the convention center, and then for that particular garage, and that some language like that would be okay?
Something that commits both for the center's business and wherever the hotel ends up being, they're going to want a similar arrangement. They're going to want to have some committed number of spaces, my experience tells me, from our other garages, and that's something we anticipate happening.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
But basically, the idea is that we are delegating to the city that the responsibility for managing the parking, however you do it. You know, if you build a 20-story garage, or if you have an off-site shuttle, or however you do it, that's the city's responsibility.
And I think if I could just offer, I know this isn't seemingly anything to be arguing about, but if it makes sense, in the big picture, we look at parking inventory in our entire downtown. And and it's not you guys, but if we gave it to the CIB or anybody else and they decided to give it away for free, then it affects everything else around the inventory. So we're just trying to make sure we manage all parking inventory.
Or vice versa. If they charge $30 an hour, then everybody would park in the streets or in the
which has a ripple effect that's negative. So you get it. That's just wanted to put that on the record. That was the reason for that thinking behind it.
So item 6 is the city's requested 2 contracts for design, one for the convention center expansion by the CIB when formed, and then another for the garage, which would be controlled exclusively by the city.
Also want to offer design of the garage. We absolutely want your input. This isn't to exclude that input at all. It's just simply the contractual arrangement and design discussions and formality of that would be on the city side. But of course, it has to coincide with, look like, fit, attached to assets that you have that would, none of those decisions would be made without county input.
Is there any other discussion, Commissioner Thompson? Okay. I think we're all in agreement here on that as well, too. So item 7 would be the county commits to continue appropriate funding of the convention center from innkeeper's tax to be sent to the CIB for convention center operations, maintenance, and so forth.
So I think we'd like to hear from Mike Campbell again about this point, because he's been handling the budgets and presenting them to the commission annually for a number of years.
Are you going to speak to 7 and 8 while you're there?
Yeah, that would be great.
So as far as number 7, I will say the current model where we're able to work with both Visit Bloomington and the Convention Center under one entity, and funding and coordination that is able to happen that way, I wouldn't want to lose that in some way, shape, or form. In item 7, it talks about only funding operations and maintenance for the facility and transferring that to the CIB. But what operations does that entail?
Yeah, does that mean the marketing or not?
Does that mean the sales, right? And in marketing outside of Monroe County or associations or area associations is an integral part, not just who cleans the bathrooms as well too, which both are integrally important. They are where I work, and they are in the convention center as well too. But where does that stop and where does that start? So I would urge some caution here about transferring funds for operations to a CIB or a different organization without doing or separating those from what we're doing for marketing the rest of the community.
Sure.
As the board member, Pat, from the Visit Bloomington side of the equation, let me just say that the intent here, and now my city hat, is not the 5% being the articulated amount in this, but rather the part that you are already moving into the operations management and maintenance of the convention center. That's the piece. We understand, support, and would never want the arrangement to change to support Visit Bloomington's mission, which is every tourism attraction in the county. Just that the piece that you have been allocating for convention center operations management maintenance, that piece gets reviewed by and approved by the other entity. That's what we're looking at, is sort of segregating it that way.
And right now, as I understand it, even though the legislation says that the debt's supposed to come off of the top, it in practicality, I believe, is coming off of the 2% that was added on to the tax back when we did the convention center. It used to be 3%, and that all went for marketing and so forth. And then we added 2% for operations. But out of that 2%, the debt is coming off. So once that debt is paid off, there should be more money for operations. So I'm trying to figure out, are we still going to keep that 3.2, or are we going to look at that revenue coming in? Perhaps those percentages might change. Will the debt come off of the top? What kind of debt would we say would be coming off of the top of that? There's still a lot to be worked out, it seems to me. Not that it can't be worked out, but...
All valid points.
So I would say that I just don't want to be artificially constrained. I don't think our community is served by having artificial constraints saying, because we've always transferred this amount to convention center operations and marketing and sales, if there is an opportunity to engage a wider convention center sales within Visit Bloomington or some other organization where we can marshal our resources together, and we'll be marketing in Washington, D.C., or we'll be marketing in Chicago. And so being able to do that, I would say I don't want an artificial constraint saying a 3%, 2%, and us having to not being as efficient as we could be with our resources is my only, right.
Yeah. I would just say we agree with that. That the 2.3 is what it is today. That may change, as Councilmember Hawk said, and McKim as well. It may need to be 1.5, 3.5, one way or the other. We don't know. We're not suggesting that you all don't know the right way to allocate that, but that it could change is a relevant point.
Or need versus need, right? There may be more need in operation as need be, and that funds needs to be there so we can deliver a great service, because that's one of our principal marketing arms. So that's my only concern here, is that in number 7, it talked about operations and transferring funds to a CIB for operations, and not talking about the other piece. As far as a sales piece or a marketing piece, it's not in there anyway, and so that's my concern.
We can broaden that out further and make this all work.
I agree with this.
Can I point out something as well? While you're here, Mike, I want to just make sure that everybody is aware that as you know, one of the duties of a CVC is to promote and encourage in the county conventions, trade shows, visitors, special events, etc. Specifically in the CIB statute as well, it says they can prepare and publish descriptive material and literature relating to the facilities and advantages of a capital improvement, and do all other acts that the board considers necessary to promote and publicize the capital improvement and serve the commercial, industrial, and cultural interests of Indiana and its citizens by the use of the capital improvement. It may assist and cooperate with public, governmental, and private agencies. It goes on to say specifically in a separate section, promote the development and growth of the convention and visitor industry in the county. There's overlap. So the CIB is specifically instructed to do some of the same work that the CVC has done. Mick and I have talked about that as well. So we want to marry those sections, and we're going to have to make sure that the CIB and the CVC, who are both authorized to do some of the same work, that we make clear who's doing what. But the money for, so we'll just have to make sure that we make that work.
So want 2 competing
Correct.
Yes.
marketing and sales
Yes.
efforts. We want one very efficient one.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Moving on to item 8, both city and county approved the capital improvement board selection of and contracting with an entity or entities to operate and manage the expanded convention center. Did you want to weigh in on that as well?
So currently, this does reside with the CVC. As we do contract with Downtown Bloomington Inc. at this point to operate the facility, and the same thing with Visit Bloomington as well too. So is one consideration as we're talking about what is the CIB, and I guess it boils to the question: does the CIB want to be an operator of the convention center, or is their purview something a little different?
Go ahead.
My sense is that the CIB doesn't want to operate it, but wants to, and the city and county want to have, make sure that the operator selected is one we all are in agreement with. That's all. That's all this means, not that the CIB would be the operator.
Do CIBs typically operate conventions?
They're statutorily authorized to operate,
Okay.
but they can contract with other agencies.
Okay.
So it is a specific duty that the CIB has to operate the capital improvement.
Okay.
Exactly.
Can you move money from tax money over to a not-for-profit group that you're contracting with to provide the service, which I believe is just exactly how it's happening now. Is that correct?
We do contract with an outside organization in order to operate the facility. So and I guess statutorily, is that what you're talking about, transferring to the CIB at this point from the CVC? Is to operate the facility or not?
Yeah, I mean, it does say, I mean, that, the sort of the point is create the CIB, let them, as the statute says, control and operate a capital improvement. They can receive and collect money. They can employ people. They can enter into contracts with executive directors. It's very, very thorough what a CIB has in terms of the operating and marketing authority. So hearing what the experts sort of think would be the best model, because we've, as I've said, listen to you, we have, Downtown Bloomington Inc., Visit Bloomington, the CVC, we'll have the CIB. We need to make sure that we create something streamlined so people aren't stepping on each other's toes.
So the one concern I would have with that is marketing and sales, promising something you don't deliver on or you're not responsible for delivering on. Separating those two things is something that hoteliers, on the whole, struggle with often. We have great salespeople. They go out and sell things, and then we're like, we have to do what? And so to some degree, it sets that up with this organization by having two separate entities where we're talking about going out and marketing the community and encouraging and getting organizations and associations to come to our community for those conventions. And then having an operator say, we're not going to do that. Okay, that's too hard. And so there is a tension there both ways. So salespeople love to overcommit, and operators love to say, I want to do what's safe. And so the struggle between the two, there needs to be some arbitrator to be able to say this is what we need to do from an overall. Now, the CVC has been that arbitrator in the past. And if you have a CVC and a CIB, where responsibilities are separate, you potentially create that without an arbitrator, except coming to a body like this to be the arbitrator of that, which I don't think you want.
No. Well,
that's my concern with that, with that model.
Any other questions or discussion on this item?
it does strike me that the process that we just went through of trying to get details ironed out at the very last minute is really, it's really helpful to be talking about this now before we set up the CIB to try and iron out a lot of these details. This is very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So moving on to item 10 here, the CIB, the city proposes CIB decide location. of expanded convention center components, including the site plan for exhibit. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. The CIB would decide and oversee the process for selecting a hotelier or hoteliers to partner with the convention center. I think we've all been happy to support that. Is there?
There you go. Moving on.
Right along, yeah.
Just check and be quiet. All right, I'll do that.
Maybe that's why I skipped it in the first place.
I think so.
Slip there.
As well, the CIB would decide the location of the expanded components of the convention center, including site plan for exhibit and meeting space, hotel, and connections among components. I think we're all in agreement on that. Is there anybody who's not? Okay. The CIB would hire and retain incidental staff and support as needed. Again, I think that makes perfect sense. We're all in agreement there.
Taking into account Mr. Campbell's remarks on operations.
Right.
Yeah.
Item 12, all city and county property purchased via the innkeeper's tax or food and beverage taxes will be transferred expeditiously to the Capital Improvement Board, and the city will contribute the north block as well. Yes?
Are we going to state that only the property that the innkeeper's tax is paying for that's going to be used for the project would be transferred over? Case in point, our Convention and Visitors Bureau building, if and when that they should ever move from that building, the county had always thought that we would use those dollars from the sale of that property to make certain that there was a new location for the Bureau to move to and so forth. So, or we could be using it for any other obligations that we would need to use it for. I don't mean for other county buildings, but
I'd be
having
curious
to
see
do
if
with
Mr.
it.
Reneisen has any insight on what the proposal.
I thought about the Visit Bloomington site when this was being conceptualized. Really, we're thinking more of the direct property that you all did a great job acquiring all these years so we can have an expansion, and thinking that those properties will only cost more if we get rid of them and try to acquire them again 20 years from now when we might want to expand again. So the thinking was, don't let that great asset of property go away and just put it in the CIB. Now that piece is an interesting exception to that because I hadn't thought about that. My hope is...
Property within a certain radius of the existing.
Yeah, I don't even really know all the extent of what you own with the innkeeper's tax, and that one was one of the ones that I should have known and thought about when this was being conceptualized. Mostly it was what was purchased in the blocks area that we're talking about, where the logical first expansion and then imagining another one 20 or 30 years from now and preserving that opportunity. But I do want to comment to Councilmember Hawk's point about Visit Bloomington, and again, wearing the other hat, I think, and it's not a secret that we hope that Visit Bloomington moves into the expanded convention center, and that location would make more sense. And then therefore that asset, when sold, could help make that, monetize that in a way that would cut the cost of their move. So with that spirit in mind, I hadn't thought about the Visit Bloomington site.
Aside from the Visit Bloomington site, the county does receive a relatively small amount of the food and beverage tax, which could be used to buy properties in other areas of the county. And I'm not sure they should get rolled into this.
That's a great observation. It wasn't intended. That, as we have indicated from the first MOU, is your all's to do with whatever tourism-based promotions you want. So if you acquire property with that, that would be an exclusion. We wouldn't anticipate that going in there.
You're really being very specific about the convention center expansion project here.
Really, yes. Yeah, the land that had been acquired with that kind of intent in mind, right?
I do. Go ahead.
Right, but even among that, there's more property that is owned in the downtown area than is going to be needed that is going to be needed for this. So I think we're just going to have to go through that and be careful about how we define it, because we don't know, because site's not developed yet, we can't name properties, right? So we're going to have to just be conscientious about that. So.
Can I speak from the lawyer side? We lawyers have talked about it, and just as an idea, we thought you define the project as the expansion project. You give what is necessary for that expansion project, and stop. And then, as you know, be good stewards of the assets that you own, but you never know what might change. Early on when we were acquiring Property South, did not ever expect that the north option was going to become a possibility. We don't know if west is going to become a possibility. We don't know what's going to happen with the hospital. The land that the county owns up to 2nd Street is very close to the hospital. So I would caution you to not overcommit real estate to a CIB if it isn't necessary for the project now. Of course, you want to hold it and be good stewards of it, but we can't predict what 20 years is going to look like.
So we don't have a site location.
Yes.
So, okay.
Any further discussion, questions? Okay. So item 13, now this is an interesting one. Curious what everybody's thinking about this. The city's proposed that the city controller is appointed as the CIB controller. Yes, Councilmember Paul.
I would join in with some of the city colleagues who indicated they believed that the city controller had a full-time job working for the city. I believe CIB should be able to choose their own staff and all of their support people. And of course, their accounting system should be open to the public, not just to the city and county bodies, but to the public. On down further, there's talking about whether or not it would be the State Board of Accounts that would check it out, or some other entity. But if they want to cover somebody else to be included, but State Board of Accounts certainly I would believe would be, when we're talking about this, we're talking about finances over 30-some years and how it's all to be split up, and it needs to be easily understood, easily available to anyone who wants to look at it.
No disagreement there. This is really an offer. As the CIB gets formed, it's going to have a whole lot of tasks. We're outlining some of those now. And the thought was, we have somebody who's been involved in the project, and could they help in that interim period until something else happens? So, I think the CIB may ask for that. If they don't, they don't. And I think in the spirit of everything else we've talked about, being no electeds, no staff on everything else, I understand the reason why this isn't something that everybody wants to agree to. I think I just want to mention the spirit of it is that person could be of help because of their inherent knowledge and what's been going on so far in an interim period. I think we ideally would like to have had this person be involved longer term than that, but I understand the concern, particularly as we've talked about other things where we're trying to exclude staff and electeds from all the other roles. It's fair to say this would be one of those that we would have. Just, it's an offer for at least an interim assistance in the project as it gets started. It may not be necessary.
I think it'd be wise to say and helpful to say to work in an advisory role, because I think that's pretty much what you're saying, right? They're there to offer advice or suggestions to help.
I think we certainly want to offer that. The time we put this together, we know there has to be a controller for the CIB, and we were offering that service as well. But I think we're certainly willing to negotiate this one. It's just an offer.
Thanks for clarifying that. Any other questions or comments on this?
We're all in agreement the long-term and independent controller is important.
I'll just note also that the County Solid Waste Management District, on which the the mayor and a city council member said, as well as commissioners and a county council member, has an independent controller. And I just think this is good business practice.
Very good. Moving on to item 14, the Capital Improvement Board has authority as allowed to pursue permission to have an outside independent audit in lieu of State Board of Accounts. Any,
I think that was clarified yesterday in terms of the statute, so I think I would just leave that to.
Okay.
Yeah, I would imagine that whatever accounting firm is hired to provide the controller function for the CIB will be conducting audits, whether with the county and the city or with a different firm. But also, we want the State Board of Accounts. There could be additional, but I don't want to supplant, and I don't think we can legally supplant anyway. So some of that's a legal question that we'll need to have staff write appropriately, but.
There's a section with 6 subsections just on the controller and the funds in state law. And I can tell you the last sentence says, the handling and expenditure of funds is subject to audit and supervision by the State Board of Accounts. So we have pretty clear guidance in state law. We certainly always can supplement, but we can't deviate and contradict. So we'll be following these provisions if a CIB is created.
Just one offer, I did not edit this document after we talked yesterday, other than putting the bullets into numbers so we could talk about it more easily. And that was intentional. I heard the comment about this in lieu, and we agree with that. So rather than have started to edit it, I thought I would just leave it in the same verbiage that you got it, and then you can edit it, which is what you're doing now. And we don't disagree with that. The in lieu is not really the point here. It was in addition to. So it's fine.
Thank you. Okay, naming of the new convention center will be determined by the CIB. I think that's a perfectly appropriate role for the CIB. Anybody else? Yes.
One thing that City Council member Dorothy Granger said yesterday is that they cannot sell the naming rights. They cannot sell the naming rights. We can't
become the
Right, I'm
Coca-Cola
hearing you.
Convention Center.
I'm hearing you. And I think we really need to listen to the experts who market this, because if they've already marketed this as the Monroe Convention Center and they're already selling out in advance, that we need to listen to their advice. I would, sometimes if you try to rename something, it makes it difficult. So.
Do you have any insights on Councilor Hawk's comments?
I would just say that the new convention center, I imagine, is still a few years away. So we'll have so we'll have a little time to market to whatever entity is done. And just with any new development, a renaming is an opportunity for marketing. And so I wouldn't see that as necessarily an impediment.
Yes.
The other thing I raised yesterday about this is because we use a lot of shorthand and we say things over and over and over again, that we've dropped the word civic from this project, and this was always intended to be a civic and convention center. And so one of the things that I think we're going to have to incorporate into this agreement is some way to ensure community access to the space, not necessarily as a first priority, but as a low cost or free meeting space. And really, this is supposed to be a community space. That's the one thing that I really like about it, honestly. And I don't want to lose that. And so we have to figure out some way to incorporate that in. But I want to make sure we get back to civic as part of this project.
That's a good point.
Do you want the city and county to, if the CIB names it, do you want the city and county to approve the name or have any review and approval of the naming? What do you guys think about that?
Because, I just...
I'm taking notes, by the way, for an interlocal.
I guess I would envision this as a very, collecting a lot of input from the community. The CIB is kind of in charge of this project, the naming project, but would be very inclusive of community input, in addition to the input of the experts in the tourism community and the marketing functions and so forth. And so this would be a really collaborative effort, community-wide. Yep.
I agree with Commissioner Thomas's point that it is going to be a civic center. It's not going to lose that. In fact, it's going to have way more opportunity because it's going to be bigger. So you can actually have conventions and civic events at the same time, which will be great, right? We'll be able to really market it both ways. To Mike's point, I just want to make this comment. The name is not the last thing that will be decided. It's one of the first, because the marketing people are going to want to start selling it as soon as we know we're going to turn dirt 18 months later when it opens. It needs to be filled. So they need a name way sooner than the end of this project, and we just need to be mindful that we don't want that to be tossed and bannered around too long. It has to be decided, and of course the subject matter experts need to weigh in and make sure we have the right name.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, I certainly don't object to both sides having a kind of a say over the or approval over the name, or a panel, if that's what. I would hate to absolutely right off the bat eliminate the possibility of selling naming rights as long as the two parties have approval. Because I mean, there could be nobody's going to want a Pepsi Center or the Verizon Wireless Center or whatever. But there are just as an example, like in Cincinnati, the baseball stadium used to be Synergy Field, totally obnoxious. But now the naming rights were bought by Great American Insurance Company. It's called Great American Ballpark, which is a good name. They got a ton of money for it, and it's a good name that I think reflects well on the community. So I would just hate to discount that before you even know what the name is going to be. But that's.
If I can add, sorry, Mick. Go ahead. If I can add, I don't have a strong objection to us or to the county and the city weighing in on the name. I do have some faith in CIB appointees that come from both sides to work through all that, given the community input we've already had. We know how sensitive things are. I would want to make sure that the name would not become something that would get us 2 years down the road as an issue. I mean, I think all of us are mindful that if you call that the Coca-Cola 3000 Civic Convention Center Extravaganza, we're going to have a problem. But at the same time, I'm very concerned that we get back here and suddenly we're fighting over a name. So I'd either want to see us have some sort of deadline timeline for which bodies agreed to that, or we trust the CIB, who are our appointees, to make those decisions.
Love that word, deadline.
I learned it from
Makes
someone.
people move.
Okay, does that sound good? Okay, moving on to item 16. Interlocal agreement will be negotiated prior to operation of the Capital Improvement Board to include additional specific components, including staffing needs, the CVC and CIB.
Seems straightforward.
I think so. Anybody have any questions or comments on this? Commissioners? Good.
I guess this is a question for Mike again. Does the CVC will they need any change in their staffing levels?
Okay. And then finally, once agreed to terms of the Capital Improvement Board mutual rights and obligations are established, they cannot be altered during length of any bond issued to expand the convention center. State legislative or other mandated changes substantively affect these mutual rights and obligations. Parties must agree to maintain the negotiated balance, or if no agreement can be reached, they must establish a 501c3 or alternative governance structure that will maintain the balance. Any questions regarding this item? Yes, Mr. McKinney.
Yeah, so does that bind our hands too much? I mean, I agree, we don't want to, we wouldn't be able to make any changes that would impair the ability to pay the bonds and operate the center. But if both parties saw that there was something that wasn't working well, I mean, I would think they should bilaterally have the ability to make that change, right?
This goes to Marty's point earlier. There's case law on this that you guys cannot bind the next county council for the next 30 years. They get elected, they get to do their job. The commissioners get elected to do their job, the mayor gets to do his job, and the city council gets to do their job. So we certainly can say, we'd have to say, as allowed by law, but if the next city council and the next county council and mayor and commissioners want to change things, they're legally allowed to do that, and we have to make sure that we're all clear and upfront that you're in charge now, but you're not in charge in 20 years necessarily. So certainly it is the intent to keep this as a document, I think, that lives and breathes and reflects, well on this capital improvement and the county and city's interests.
Just to clarify, so that the next council, commissioners, mayor, city council, they can renegotiate the next interlocal.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that's their opportunity, that they could negotiate something totally different, and that's what their right is. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, we've changed the dispatch interlocal, over time. For instance, it used to be city appointed so many employees, county appointed so many employees, and now they're all city employees, and that's because the interlocal changed.
But the intention is to make this interlocal perpetual until amended or rescinded.
Yes, that is certainly the intent, and we will make sure that spirit, but again, like a whereas that we've talked about, that's certainly the intent. I think that's appropriate, that's where you put it. But we'll recognize your authority and then, future governing bodies' authorities.
Well, I think Nick just mentioned, and keep the balance at it.
Yeah.
So the intention is not to keep every single word of the interlocal set in stone in perpetuity, but to make sure that the true and equal partnership and the balance of appointees and control is maintained.
Great. I actually had a question about the one that before this that everybody said, oh, that seems straightforward to me, to you guys. When I'm looking at that, I'm trying to put that down. It's like we're to negotiate prior to a CIB being established what their staffing needs are. To me, seems to be a little awkward.
It is.
I mean, I guess I understand that they're going to have functions that we're going to have to be able to account for and budget for and make sure they're funded. I think a great point I think Mike brought up earlier is there's a question, is the CIB going to actually operate the facility, or are they going to contract with the facility? Because those are two very different worlds when we're talking about what we need for staffing and those kind of things. So I'm curious if, is it just kind of agreed upon here what they're going to need to do, and here are the funding sources that we're going to have for that? Is that what the city is getting at here, or we're trying to say they're going to need 3 janitors, 2... I want to make sure I'm clear on that before I start working.
I think it's even simpler than that. I think that the way that all the entities that have been created by state statute are supported by staff now, we didn't word this very articulately, is largely county staff. You all are sharing I'll call it the burden of managing the meetings and the minutes and all of the back of house stuff that happens for the Food and Beverage Commission, for the CVC, because you're statutorily, it's your group. And this new CIB as well. You all get to statutorily respond to those, but your staff, the ones I know very well, have to work on all the detail in the background and support it. I think really what we're getting at is, can some of that be shared, and is there a way we just work out, well, here's how we'll staff or help staff the meetings of the CIB, the CVC. I'm not trying to recreate what you're already doing. I think we're trying to offer some support in a way that we can define who supports which entity, so it doesn't fall on one group all the time to do all of those things. Does that make sense? Not trying to decide what staff the CVC will need or the CIB will need. That's for them to figure out when they get there.
Because we'll know they'll need an organizational meeting to begin.
Right, that's right.
Just as an example. So
who's going to call the meeting?
Who's going to issue the notices? Do the notices and all that kind of stuff. And he's going to train whoever they choose they want to do the notices in the future. I said, hey, here's how.
And maybe we share those duties, right? Maybe we decide that we're going to have a representative from X and Y be the staffing entities, and then those entities figure out, well, we're going to notice it and you guys can take a minute, whatever. We just thought that was a
That is
discussion
much
worth having.
simpler than what was running through my head when I read that section. Right?
That's the
Much
problem.
simpler. I'm glad I came up.
Thank you for allowing me to explain that we were not trying to overstep and try to figure out what everybody's full-time staffing needs for those commissions would be in the future. That's not the intent.
Yes.
Is there some place here, maybe in the legislation, and I have read it, but it's been a bit, so I don't have it memorized, where we can require that their meetings be public meetings and covered by CATS to the extent possible, so the public can actually follow along with what's happening with this huge project?
For the CID, is that what you're talking about?
Right.
Yeah, they're governmental entities, so they're subject to the open door law. And the CATS add-on is something we certainly can add on. That's not required by state law. It's something we do locally, and we like to do.
Well, you
Yeah.
can say to the extent possible.
Yeah, sure, yeah, but they will be open, they're subject to open door law.
For everybody who's watching climate change and let's reduce the amount of fuel we're using and so forth, let us watch these meetings from home. We have a great CATS TV to cover. I'm with you in your meetings every time you open the city hall, so.
We have no objections.
And I do not have to pay for a parking space or use the gas.
Commissioner Thomas, did you have?
Yeah, I just want to add that we wanted to ensure there's a component for public comment as well at these meetings. Thank you.
Great. All right, so let me ask the commissioners, do you feel like you've got enough guidance here from council on your next steps?
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We did actually skip one bullet that I did want to
Which
discuss.
one?
It's actually item number 1, bullet 3, about who makes the appointments.
Yeah, oh, yes.
And I'm curious as to what both the city and commissioner's perspective is on that.
Right. So what we heard yesterday was that the city wants this just to be called city, and we'll just call the other one county, and we'll figure it out later.
Okay, so we'll have to.
That's what I heard yesterday. That's what I wrote down.
That's
Okay,
correct.
yeah. Well, that's stuff that we need to work out, in-house, right?
Right, the city doesn't care how the county,
Right.
and the county doesn't care how the city makes their appointments. Okay, very
If
good.
that's okay with everyone.
Yep, we'll figure those things out amongst ourselves. Okay, very good. Well, I think that's all the business that the county council had to do today. Do the commissioners have any additional items that?
We have an additional item just for our own business. So you all can adjourn your meeting. We have one item left to hear on our meeting that was recessed from yesterday.
Okay.
And then we'll adjourn unless there's anything else that we need to cover.
Perfect, thank you. Before we,
Adjourn, and while we still have the deputy mayor here, are we still on a timeline where we're going to be able to pull as much of this together so we can start moving forward by the end of the year?
I think that's our intent, and I think if we can't get there for some technical reasons, I think our sentiment is we would ask that we just extend that timeline jointly. If we agree, we just aren't there yet, because there's a lot of detail to work on. But I think the last couple days have been outstanding, and I wanted to mention that before I depart and leave you to your meeting, that I just want to thank everyone for getting to where we are. This has been awesome in the last week, the amount of movement that's been made, and I just look forward to continuing to work with all of you for the betterment of our community. This project's going to be a game changer for us all. So finally, Cheryl and I kind of did a little happy comment last night after the city council's meeting, and I thank all of you for showing up last night and spending time to support the project like you did. That was really appreciated, and hence my reason for being here today. I wanted to also acknowledge and support you in the steps that you're taking. So I think we're getting there. If we need a bit more time, it's simply going to be, I think, for technical reasons, just to iron out the detail of some of these. If you want to appoint the CIB technically in your meeting, and these things aren't worked out, I think we have agreed we aren't opposed to you going ahead and creating the ordinance, and then we fill it in after, now that we have all these things kind of.
That would be awesome, because there's really no reason why they couldn't make their appointments. You folks make your appointments, they move forward. The whole board would be set up then.
If you want to create it, I guess that's what I meant to say by ordinance.
So you know it's done.
Commissioner Thompson.
Okay, so a couple things. I just want to reiterate something that all of us who were present last night said at the city council meeting, in addition to our thanks for everybody for getting us to this point, and let's keep this forward momentum going. You know, that it really is good. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody who's put a lot of time into this. This is supposed to be a part-time job, right? So I keep telling myself that. And I tell all my students that, my 4 classes. So the other thing is that we have we made a statement, and there was full unanimity among all those who spoke from the county council and the county commissioners that we would like to see this project be as environmentally sustainable as possible. And that would be either in the LEED standard or in zero carbon, net zero carbon. So we do need to figure out how to write that in as well. Lastly, I will say that at our meeting yesterday, we decided that we're going to gather a week from today at 4 o'clock, December 19th, 4 o'clock here. And the 2 councils, everyone's obviously invited, but because we know that getting 20 together and trying to do something where everybody can come is impossible, we would just like to have at least a contingent from the county council present that you could take back, not to say you can commit to anything, but you can take back something for your members to look at, or perhaps to vote on if we can get that far. So the idea is this interlocal is going to have to be signed by all 4 entities, correct, Ms. Rice? Right. So we're working diligently to get something together to have for that meeting a week from today. So we are moving forward very quickly. We are progressing very quickly as we can, yet being as careful as we can. So the idea is that we will have something, and if the skies really open up and we really have a great amount of agreement, and we can sit at that table and say, you know, we just have one thing to work out, or 2 things, or whatever it might be, perhaps we could get it back to the respective bodies for public comment and a vote soon. And so that would be the very beginning of the new year, I would imagine. So just based on when all the holidays are falling this year, in the middle of the week. So just so you know, we're not just saying, oh, this is all we're doing, we're going to come back to 2020. We actually are moving ahead, and we do need some county councilors at that meeting. So hopefully some of you, if not all of you, can attend. So thank you.
We'll definitely have some representation there for sure. Yes, Councilmember Munson.
So about the meeting next Thursday, I found it very helpful to look at statements that were numbered rather than the more complicated prose that goes into an interlocal agreement. And I don't know, I like the topical statements. And when we get to agreement as to how things work, then that should be just indicated that that has been agreed to. And then we can move to the next step. But I would like to leave the prose until after the elements of the agreement are worked out. Secondly, I'm going to bring up something that Councilor Hawk did, and she said she would like to see a flow chart of how the money moves and the approvals that go with that. And I know that's a little complicated, but because it's not just components, it's also timing. So there's a chronological element as well as element of who is handling what and for which particular reasons. So that's my request, if you could have that for Thursday.
And then I guess, is it the commissioner's intention to vote on the creation of a CIB at your next Wednesday meeting or sometime after the Thursday meeting? Or what is your current thoughts on that?
We can. We haven't made that formal decision yet, but it's on the floor still.
Yeah.
And it's a possibility. We have not yet made that determination.
And if there are people that want to come to next Wednesday's meeting, especially to make public comment, we welcome that.
Very good. Okay, well, while the deputy mayor's here, does anybody else have any comments before we adjourn? I just want to say thank you to the administration, to the city council, to all involved for this great progress that we've made here over the last couple of days. This has been monumental progress. And it's incredible to think about where we were a couple of weeks ago versus where we are now. This has just been terrific, the outcome here. So thank you very, very much.
I'll echo that. Thank you. Thank you.
And the county council is adjourned.